Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. Thank you for your attention while this important legal information is reviewed. What you hear should not replace consultation with an attorney and should not be considered advice for your situation. On behalf of the Pilot Lawyer and your entire crew, it's our pleasure to have you aboard.
Welcome, aviators, to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast with us, the Eisen brothers, at the Eisen Law Firm, where aviation law is all we do, nothing else. You're here for what we do best, or what we think we do best, navigating the FAA medical certification process for pilots and those who want to become pilots. We like to think if you don't laugh, you cry. And for the next 30 minutes, we hope to bring you the lighter side of what can otherwise be a frustrating process. So whether you're laughing at us or with us, join us brothers as we discuss the fascinating world of FAA medical certification. Your crew here today is the big cheese, Anthony Eisen. We also have with us attorney Christopher Eisen and Dr. Alex Eisen.
He's a little cheese.
Well, don't cut him off in traffic. Gee whiz. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
What are we discussing today?
I want to talk about FAA medical denials because that's a topic that keeps me up at night.
Fascinating. That and all your indigestion.
That too, but that's a different topic for a different podcast.
That's right. Well, FAA medical denials, is that what you want to talk about?
Is that something we should talk
That's
about?
something we definitely need to talk about. And I bet there's a listener out there right now who's just about to turn this thing off. Think, hey, I have an FAA medical denial. What could these clowns do for us? Good question. Depends on what kind of FAA medical denial you have. So today we're going to talk about what kind of FAA medical certificate denials there are and what you can do to help move things forward.
Wait, what kind of clown are you?
I'm one of those clowns that sad.
Bozo clown?
Yeah.
I think Bozo was happy though.
Yeah.
Oh, you
There
are
are different
Bozo.
types of clowns though.
Waka
There's that like Pennywise one, the evil clown. Then there's Bozo, which we established you are.
Yes.
And then you look you do look like a sad clown.
Well, you know what the thing is? I saw you getting out of your car earlier, and I thought, where are his big red shoes? Nevertheless, we're here to talk about FAA medical certificate denials. So let's say you went into your AME, your aviation medical examiner. You said, hey, I'm here, apply for a first-class medical. And the doctor said, get out of here. I'm not giving you a medical. I'm sending this up to the big cheeses in Oklahoma City.
I'm going to deny it myself.
I've seen that happen. It's very rare, though.
Which that's not right, though. The AME can't deny your medical.
The AME can deny the medical, but it's not a final denial. So it's essentially meaningless. So the AME might as well say, hey, listen, instead of denying this, I'm going to defer it. And so he or she sends it up to the Oklahoma City office for them to say, hey, what's this all about? I see that you have a problem.
What goes on in Oklahoma City? Why is that
Oklahoma
such a hub?
City is where the AMCD is.
Do you even know what that stands for?
Do you even know what you stand for?
If you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. Wait, wait, is that right?
Oh, man.
Stand for something.
That's like the old George Bush. Fool me once, shame on.
You look like a fool.
Well, you can't fool me twice.
AMCD stands for Aerospace Medical Certification Division.
Oh, you got it.
I got it, baby. Let me put my Google away.
Didn't hurt. You had it written down in front of you.
That's what. Well, That being said, so let's say you go into your AME and say, hey, listen, man, you've got a problem, whatever it may be. You've got anxiety, you've got the history of depression, PTSD, whatever it may be. And the AME says, I can't issue this. I'm going to have to send it to the AMCD for the doctors in Oklahoma City to process this, request and review your medical records, and so on before they can determine whether or not you're eligible to hold a medical certificate. In those cases, that deferral can ultimately end in a denial. There are different types of denials, though, right? Other than the denial you have about your weight problems.
I don't deny it.
You
I
would
embrace
know.
It shows. What's this roll call? roll call has a different meaning to you. That being said, that gets us into these different types of denials. But a denial here at the Eisen Law Firm doesn't really mean anything to us, does it? Does it mean anything to you?
It's just a river in Africa.
Yeah. It's just a route to a yes in my mind. A no should be a yes in my mind.
Entirely optimistic.
Very optimistic. That's why we brought you along to bring people down. The idea here, though, is that no denial is a final denial. Almost everything can be reconsidered until later on you're out there flying, baby, with a full-blown medical certificate.
Well, that sounds just so encouraging. Let's talk more about how we can turn that frown upside down.
Yes.
Let's get you from no to yes.
Yeah, let's do it. Depends on what kind of denial you have first. So let's say the AME's deferred you. The FAA sends you a letter, say, hey, listen, Sergeant, we need all your medical records relative to your history of depression.
But that is an infringement on my constitutional right. They don't have any right to my medical records.
Who are you? How'd you get in here?
I just thought I'd show up for a career.
Well, essentially, you have no right to privacy with respect to these records, if that makes sense. So in other words, the FAA considers these process a privilege. If you want the medical certificate, you're going to have to provide us the records that we ask for in some regards. Now, just because they ask for a record doesn't always mean we're going to give it to them. There's some times where we can push back on the request and see if there's a way to give them something else to satisfy them if need be. That's kind of on a case-by-case basis. Well, let's say they ask for your records and you don't provide the records within the time they allot. They're going to send you a failure to provide.
Sounds scary.
That's something your family's familiar with, Christopher. Failure to provide.
Love and affection, not medical records.
I provide all the love and affection they need.
They get by with so little. Nevertheless, failure to provide essentially is where they're saying, hey, listen, we didn't get the records we asked for. What's going on here? And so they'll say, we're going to put this over here in this bin. You're going to put your file over in this bin, this denial bin. If you want to send us the records, go ahead, send it in. We'll open it back up. So if you get a failure to provide denial letter, meaningless, absolutely meaningless. I mean, don't go fly because you don't have a medical, but it's meaningless because we can figure out what records we need to send them on in, it'll go right back into review.
Now, if you get a failure to provide medical denial and you don't respond to it, can the FAA eventually send your file to enforcement to try and take away a certificate or something like that?
Ladies and gentlemen, he's been paying attention for the past several years. He's got a relevant question.
Oh boy.
So if
I'm gonna stop now and leave. I've done everything I'm gonna do today.
That being said, essentially, yes, if your medical certificate has been issued and the FAA asks for records, then if you don't provide the medical records in a timely fashion per their 60 days or an extension, they could come along and say, hey, listen, that medical certificate you have, we've asked for records on it. We don't know if you're able to hold it or not. So we're going to have to go ahead and revoke your certificate until such time that we get the records. There's a caveat, though. Can I get a caveat alert?
There's always a caveat.
Essentially, if you've been issued a medical certificate and the FAA follows up within 60 days, which is unusual because usually they're fairly slow. If they follow up within 60 days after issuance, so say the AME says, yeah, I don't think this problem that you have is an issue in my perspective. I'm going to issue the medical. And the FAA turns around and says, hey, wait a second. What are you doing here, AME? Why'd you issue this? And they do that within 60 days and they ask for records and you don't provide those records. In that case, the FAA could say, well, we're just going to deny this and your medical could go away entirely. Whereas if they wait after 60 days and they ask for records and you don't provide them, they have to go through the process of revoking your certificate. So instead of just saying, boom, your medical's gone, they have to afford you due process because they waited beyond 60 days.
Well, let's say in either event, whether it's within the 60 days or outside the 60 days, eventually the FAA comes knocking and they say, hey, we don't really know if you're eligible to hold this. We need more records. You don't provide them the records. They either send it to enforcement to revoke your medical certificate if it's after the 60 days, or they just take back your medical within the 60 days. And let's say you've gone several months now without having provided anything. Can you, at some later date, provide the records and get the ball rolling again? Or do you have to go through the whole process of having to go see an AME?
So definitely, if you've waited, let's say, if you waited the period of time that it takes that you have left on your application. So let's say you're under 40 and you apply for a certificate and you have 5 years on an application. Let's say they ask for records. It goes beyond 60 days. They send you a failure to provide denial letter. It's a year later, you say, hey, I'm going to pick that back up because, I'm interested in aviation again. My wife has finally said, hey, you go out there and fly, and they've dropped all the lawsuits and everything else. I can finally afford to do it. In that case, you can just send it in and they'll send it back into review. The only problem there, though, is if you've waited beyond the duration of your application, they may come in and say, hey, listen, you need to submit a new application before we'll open this back up. But a failure to provide denial letter is not by any means the end of the world. We also have non-final medical denials. Do you want to know what that's all about?
If I don't ask, I'm sure you're going to tell me.
Well, hey, listen, baby, I'm here to tell. So a non-final medical denial. So essentially, there are situations that are conditions that are at the Federal Air Surgeon's discretion in being problematic. So in other words, there are catch-all regulations. So for example, ADHD, post-traumatic stress disorder, certain conditions are not identified by the regulations as being specifically disqualifying.
Whereas like bipolar disorder, substance dependence, substance abuse, those are specifically identified.
That's right. Those are specifically in the regulations as, hey, listen, don't give this person a medical if you feel that they have this condition. But other conditions like PTSD, ADHD, and so on, obstructive sleep apnea, they're not identified in the regulations. Those are conditions that the Federal Air Surgeon has said, hey, listen, in my discretion, I don't think that this airman should be flying with this condition. But let's say the application gets deferred, it gets reviewed at the AMCD, and they feel like you have one of these conditions. What can happen is at the AMCD level, they can deny your application, but it not be a final denial. And what that means is because the regulations require that the condition be denied at the Federal Air Surgeon's discretion, you have another bite at the apple there for reconsideration by the Federal Air Surgeon in non-specifically disqualifying conditions.
Now, is the Federal Air Surgeon, is he in Oklahoma City, or where does that go?
Wash his mouth out with soap.
It's a she. Get it right.
Excuse me.
Oh,
Dr. Susan Northrup.
is it cheese and
If you're
biscuits or
listening,
cheese and crackers?
sorry.
Whichever.
You should know. Hold on, it's time for our lunch service. Bring in the cheese and crackers and the biscuits, too.
You want another donut?
I'll just fish some more out of my teeth.
Has your FAA medical certificate been denied? Are you concerned you may not be able to get a medical certificate from the FAA? Are you at risk for FAA action for failing to report your medical history appropriately? Call the pilot lawyer at 1-855-FAA-1215 to discuss your options for getting the FAA to issue your medical certificate and get you flying. We are happy to evaluate your case and discuss with you a plan for presenting your case to the AME or the FAA. Aviation law is all we do, nothing else.
Anyhow, what was the question?
Where's the
Hey,
flight surgeon?
Don't choke on that last morsel.
the Federal Air Surgeons in Washington, D.C. Now, that's the thing, though. In practice, we don't see a lot of cases where a non-final denial actually goes to Federal Air Surgeon in D.C. Lots of times it'll just be funneled up to another doctor within Oklahoma City and then sort of signed off by a doctor there on behalf of the Federal Air Surgeon. With that being said, though, if you've received a non-final denial, typically that means the documents that you've provided to the FAA establish some issue or they're not complete enough to really give the FAA what they need to be able to get to a yes in your case. So if you get a non-final denial and say, oh, I'm going to ask for reconsideration by the Federal Air Surgeon. Have you ever get that rubber stamp in here? That's what they say. Hey, buddy, we're going to give you the red stamp because you haven't sound effect Larry over here. So it's one thing they're not going to just suddenly say, oh, you know what? This guy didn't know what he was talking about when he said no earlier. We'll give you your medical. No, you're wrong. If you're driving and you're listening to this, stop over.
Stop over.
Pull over and think to yourself, what was I thinking when I asked for reconsideration without providing new information? That's where we come in, or another attorney of your choice. The idea is
us. It's not the Schmiggity Schmuggity Pilot Lawyer Podcast. It's the Eisen Law Firm Pilot Lawyer Podcast.
That's true.
So you're coming to us.
Definitely.
And the idea is to figure out, well, what did you say previously? What records did you provide previously? And why have they said no? What can we put in front of them to establish your medical eligibility?
Yeah, pilot lawyer, tell us.
Yeah, well, it depends on what your condition is. That's a topic for another podcast episode. Well, let's say you do all that, and then you provide documentation to establish your medical eligibility. You feel like you got a good case on a non-final denial. You ask for reconsideration, and they do bump it up for review. The federal air surgeon can then give you a final denial.
That doesn't sound good.
How does that make you feel?
Sounds very absolute.
It sounds a bit grim.
You're fibbing. Final denial can be appealed to the National Transportation Safety Board.
Sounds bureaucratic.
That sounds even more grim.
Yeah, very grim. So at the National Transportation Safety Board, you have an opportunity to put on a trial before an administrative law judge. And what the idea is there is you're going in and saying, hey, listen, the FAA looked at my file and they got this wrong. And so you have the burden of proof to go and establish that there is an error in their review of the record and their determination of the denial.
It would seem that if that's the case, if they're looking at your airman medical file and that's going to be the basis to make or break your case.
Whoa. Back up. What's an airman medical file? You're just throwing out stuff here that we haven't discussed?
Come on. Why are you over here busting my chops?
I don't know what that is.
I'm trying to make a point. You don't know what an airman medical file is?
Hey, I've only been on the job 3 months.
Yeah, he's got this nice role as a podcast microphone holder.
I'm going to mute his microphone.
You don't know how.
Yeah, well, there's so many buttons on this thing. I never know what they do. Listen, interrupt me one more time.
You pushed my buttons.
Interrupt me one more time and see what your paycheck looks like next week. Anyhow, airman medical file, let's just go ahead and explain that to everyone, and then we can talk about what the NTSB would or wouldn't do with your airman medical file.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So what happens here is that on the front end, as you're asking for reconsideration, as you're going through the process, you're building a file for the FAA to review. And thus, if it was the airman medical file.
Thank you.
Right? And so if you're going to the NTSB, you're saying all the FAA is going to say is, hey, listen, what we had in front of us, this airman medical file, it justifies our denial. So the idea is through the process from application on, you want to make sure that you're building a proper file so that the FAA can't come back and say, hey, wait a second, you old person, this is a reasonable denial based off of what we had in front of us. So at the NTSB level, what happens is the FAA will essentially say, hey, listen, our only piece of evidence here is the airman medical file because what's in there justifies our denial. And as a result, like I said, you want to make sure you're building that file as strongly as you can throughout the lead up to the denial.
So having representation throughout the process, understanding what might be required in a legal capacity downrange would be helpful to the airmen as they go through the process, so that if they do find themselves in front of an administrative law judge, they have competent, substantial documentation to prove the case.
And where would you go to get competent representation for such a task?
It's not Schmiggity Schmoggity Law Firm. It's the Eisen Law Firm.
Yeah.
Pilot lawyer.
Hey, Schmiggity Schmoggity, if you're listening out there, we're coming for you.
That wasn't scripted.
Beautiful. Just beautiful showmanship on our regard. With that being said, if you get a final denial letter, don't go to the NTSB unless you just absolutely, in most cases, it has to be fairly clear that they erred in their decision. So for example, we have 3 different expertly trained doctors saying that you don't have a problem whatsoever. And the FAA says, no, we think you do. And we've put everything we possibly can into your file to establish that a denial is not warranted, and they still deny you. Only then would we really consider pursuing an appeal to the NTSB. With that being said, there are other options if you get a final denial. And what we typically like to do there is figure out, well, why did we get this final denial? Because final denial letter isn't really final. You can get more bites at the apple, reconsideration by the federal air surgeon. You just have to figure out, well, what don't they like? Go back and try to put something else in the file to justify your position and rectify their concerns, and from there have them look at it again until you're satisfied. I mean, and then at that point you can decide, hey, well, maybe I'll go to the NTSB. I'll take a shot there.
Now, how might you figure out what exactly is going on there? Because, I mean, I'm sure they're only going to send out cryptic mailings to you and stuff like that.
Yeah. So
This guy's been paying attention.
what I think Bozo is getting at here is the idea that, your denial letters, they don't really tell you a whole lot.
Nope.
They say, hey, listen, you're denying because of substance dependence, for example, right? But there are ways to figure out exactly what is their concern, more specifically rather than more broadly. Sometimes it comes down to, well, you can consult with somebody like us to sort of ascertain, well, what do you think the issue is? And we can make very good estimations as to what the problem is. Sometimes, most times, what we like to do is also get their applicant notes, what they call the DIWS notes, which is all their internal notes that they used internally, go figure, to justify their understanding of your situation and why they're doing what they're doing. So lots of times we like to get those and continue getting those to sort of ascertain where are things at internally in the process. And sometimes it also comes down to engaging with the doctors at the FAA to sort of discuss with them your case and some of the other folks there at the FAA to sort of say, well, what's the issue here? What can we do to get this to a yes? What can we do to get you into a certificate today?
It'd take me a lot less to get out of a certificate than into a certificate.
Well, look at you. I'm surprised you ever got into a certificate.
Hey, what they know isn't going to get me in trouble, right?
What'd you say? Just stop the podcast. What'd you say?
I was trying to set you up for the topic of another podcast. I said, what they don't know isn't going to get me in trouble.
Uh-oh. That is a crazy topic right there. Because they might find out.
What am I talking about, Joe?
Joe. Who's Joe? We're losing him.
Oh, boy.
Disconnect his mic.
Are we talking about VA disability benefits?
No, well, I guess we could be.
We could be talking about VA disability benefits. That's
I was more or less talking about falsification of applications.
Falsification of applications can easily get you to a denial, but not only a denial, but a revocation of all certificates. That's worse than you're in denial if you think that's not worse than a denial.
I do what?
A do what? Well, when the federal government comes down and says, you've been lying to us, boy.
You're fibbing.
You're fibbing.
So now you see, now everyone out there, you see what makes us laugh here at the Eisen Law Firm.
Witty banter.
Witty banter and...
Witty. Who's calling this witty? Dim-witted, maybe.
Anyhow.
So let's say, what kind of conditions can lead to a final denial? There are 14 specifically disqualifying conditions, and then any other type of condition in theory could lead itself to a final denial. But that doesn't necessarily mean, again, that it's the end of the road for you. You can keep going at this time and time again with the different evaluations. For example, psychiatric concerns. You think, hey, well, I sent in my treatment records. I got a letter from my doctor. Everybody said I'm great. Sometimes that's just not enough. You're going to need a specialist like a HIM psychiatrist or a HIM psychologist sometimes to evaluate you and get that no turned around, baby.
What is HIMS?
What is hers? HIMS is a program that the FAA is engaged with. Essentially, it stands for Human Interventional Motivational Study, I believe. Check that. Google that if you're out there. I think I got those words right.
Human Intervention Motivation Studies. At least that's what I always write it up as in our reports.
Our reports to each other. Yeah. Nevertheless, the HIMS program, essentially, if you go on their website...
Human Intervention Motivation Study.
Oh, look at
there was no all at either one of those words. Nevertheless, I'm sure my perception of the HIMS program is different than those at the FAA. But essentially what it is that the FAA and a bunch of doctors and everybody gets together and they sort of provide insight, training, counsel to various doctors within the aviation community who can then go from there and provide expert evaluations from an aeromedical perspective on certain substance use and medication use and so on that various AMEs, psychiatrists, and psychologists will become trained in. You may not always need a HIM psychiatrist for the purpose of a substance concern or medication use and so on. But the thing is that the FAA typically trusts these evaluators because they've had this training and they have a better understanding of what the FAA's perspective is with respect to clinical medicine. Well, not necessarily clinical medicine, but an understanding of aerospace medicine and so on. Have you got any other questions, Christopher or Alex? Or are you pretty much fed up? We're running out of time yet?
I think I see the runway in sight, and I'm ready to land.
You ready to crash land?
Crash land or just land. I like to walk away from my landing.
Yeah.
Are preferable.
Well, I think the bullet point for today is that if you received an FAA medical denial, it's not the end of the runway for you, and that there's many opportunities to get that denial reconsidered, reevaluated, and potentially turned into a medical certificate. Any questions today? Is that it?
The only question I have is,
Where's lunch?
he took the words out of my mouth. No, what do you think we should talk about next time?
Coming up next, we're going to be
Where are we
talking...
flying to next?
Hey, that's a good way to transition that.
Yeah.
Where we're flying to next is the non-specifically disqualifying condition of attention deficit disorder, ADD and ADHD. It's a major problem for a lot of folks out there who have been denied and have to go through evaluation to establish for the FAA that they don't have an aeromedically significant issue and thus land themselves in a denial. So
I'll pre-flight that.
you gonna pre-flight that, baby?
I'll pre-flight that.
All right. Well, looking forward to seeing you here probably in the next 30 minutes. Well, you've logged another uneventful half hour listening to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. And even though our wives deny they know us in public, we're the Eisen brothers of the Eisen Law Firm. We'll see you next time. Good day.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.